Robert Ryan as Colonel Everett Dasher Breed. The counterweight to Reisman was Colonel Everett Dasher Breed, a disciplined, cold, and principled officer. Robert Ryan, at age 58, delivered a weighty performance, making the audience both hate his rigidity and respect his authority. Robert Ryan seemed born to play villains or harsh men, but ironically, his real self was completely the opposite. He was a pacifist, an active human rights activist, and an exemplary husband with a benevolent heart. Robert Ryan's life was a tragedy of contradiction. He hated violence but became famous for violent roles. He fought for justice but was monitored by the FBI and blacklisted by Hollywood for progressive political views. But the greatest pain that defeated this man of steel was the departure of his wife, Jessica Cadwallader, due to cancer. She was the love, the raison d'etre of his life. When she died in 1972, Robert Ryan collapsed completely. He worked frantically just to escape the loneliness in the house empty of his wife. The coldness of Colonel Breed on film turned out to be just a shell for a Robert Ryan crumbling inside. He carried lung cancer from years of smoking, but physical pain was nothing compared to mental pain. Just 1 year after his wife died, his journey also stopped. On July 11, 1973, Robert Ryan passed away in New York at the age of 63. He was buried quietly next to his wife, Jessica, finally finding eternal peace beside the person he loved most. Closing the life of a villain on film, hero in real life. Robert Ryan was a man of profound paradoxes, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with a face carved from granite. He was a heavyweight boxing champion at Dartmouth College, remaining undefeated throughout his collegiate career. He could have been a professional fighter. Instead, he chose the arts. This physical prowess is what made his portrayal of Colonel Breed so intimidating. He didn't just act tough. He physically embodied a coiled spring of potential violence. Yet, off-screen, Ryan was a gentle intellectual who helped found the Oakwood School in Los Angeles and worked tirelessly for the ACLU. He was a vocal opponent of McCarthyism during the 1950s, risking his entire career to support blacklisted writers and actors. While he played bigots and racists in films like Crossfire and Bad Day at Black Rock, in reality, he marched for civil rights and fought against racial discrimination in Hollywood. The tragedy of Robert Ryan's final years is heartbreakingly cinematic. After his wife Jessica died, friends noted that the light simply went out of his eyes. They had been married for over 30 years, a rarity in Hollywood, and she was his anchor. In his grief, he took on the role of Larry Slade in The Iceman Cometh, 1973. At the time of filming, Ryan knew he was dying of lung cancer. He was in immense physical pain, struggling to breathe between takes. Yet he delivered a performance that critics hailed as the best of his career. He poured his own sorrow, his own confrontation with mortality, into the character. He refused to slow down, perhaps because working was the only way to keep the grief at bay. He died before the film was released. Lee Marvin, his co-star in The Dirty Dozen and The Professionals, once said that Robert Ryan was the only man in Hollywood who was truly too good for the business. His legacy is that of a man who played the darkness so well because he was so full of light, a warrior who hated war, and a star who cared more about humanity than fame. Welcome back to the flow of cinematic memory. In 1967, amidst a world seething with historical upheavals, the film The Dirty Dozen premiered and immediately created a seismic shift at the box office. With a story about a group of death row inmates trained for a suicide mission right before D-Day, director Robert Aldrich's work not only achieved resounding commercial success, but also redefined the war movie genre. Grittier, more brutal, and full of humanity. But behind those classic characters, behind the dust of the battlefield and the sound of gunfire, were actors with real-life fates full of unexpected turns. More than half a century has passed, and time has carved indelible marks onto their lives. Some became legends, some chose their own paths, and others had to stop their journeys in tragedy. Today, let us quiet our hearts to look back at the tumultuous journey of the 10 representative faces who created the soul of the Dirty Dozen. Jim Brown as Robert T. Jefferson. In The Dirty Dozen, Robert T. Jefferson is the embodiment of strength and steadfastness. The image of the brave black soldier sprinting to drop grenades into the air vents became a classic moment. Jim Brown, then 31 years old, was at the peak of his form. This role was the pivotal turning point that helped him decisively leave a glorious NFL career to step fully into the realm of cinema, becoming one of Hollywood's first black action stars. He brought to the character a dignity and indomitability that mirrored his own aura in real life. However, behind the halo of a sports and movie superstar was a private life full of storms. His first marriage to Sue Jones lasted 14 years but was overflowing with violence and tension. Arrests for alleged assault once nearly destroyed his career and branded him the most dangerous man in Hollywood. And although he later found a peaceful harbor with his second wife, Monique Brown, anger and conflict remained ghosts that haunted him. When old age arrived, the price of those years throwing himself around on the football field began to show. Jim underwent multiple heart surgeries and endured severe back injuries, confining his final years to a wheelchair. The contrast between a Jefferson running like the wind on film and a Jim Brown sitting in a wheelchair in his twilight years is truly poignant. He lived a life of ceaseless fighting, on the field, on the screen, and in social activism. Yet, that proud journey had to come to a stop. On May 18, 2023, Jim Brown passed away peacefully at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 87. His departure left a massive legacy estimated at $30 million, but more importantly, the image of a man who never bowed to any barrier. Ernest Borgnine as General Worden. If the Dirty Dozen needed absolute authority, it was General Worden, played by Ernest Borgnine. At age 50, with a deep, gravelly voice and cold eyes, Ernest successfully portrayed a stern commander who held the power of life and death in his hands. He brought the feeling of a true military man, making the audience feel both fear and respect. But few knew that behind that rugged and strong exterior was a tender heart, full of emotional wounds. Ernest Borgnine's life was like a long-running series with many sad low notes. He went through 5 marriages, but most left him with loneliness and suffering. His record-breaking short marriage of 32 days to singer Ethel Merman was a scar he carried all his life, as she likened it to a blank page in her memoir. Although he later found late happiness with Tova Trisnaez, Ernest could not avoid the laws of life and death. From the 70s, his health declined due to smoking and diet, leading to chronic kidney failure in old age. Even so, he kept an optimistic spirit, continuing to work and appear in public even while undergoing regular dialysis. The connection between General Worden and Ernest Borgnine lies in resilience. On film, he ordered others to sacrifice, while in real life, he fought alone against loneliness and illness until his last breath. The journey of that general closed on July 8, 2012. Ernest Borgnine passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 95, leaving behind a massive cinematic fortune and a lesson about an optimistic smile amidst life's adversities. Donald Sutherland as Vernon Pinkley. Donald Sutherland joined the Dirty Dozen when he was just 32, playing Vernon Pinkley, a goofy soldier who feigned madness to infiltrate the officer ranks. It was his intelligence and divine acting in the scene impersonating the general that took Donald from an unknown Canadian actor to a promising face in Hollywood. Pinkley brought laughter, but was also a character demonstrating the absurdity of war through a dark comedic lens. Contrary to the goofy exterior on film, Donald Sutherland's life was a long journey of hidden pain and illness. Marriages broken by geographical distance and political pressure left him with deep sadness, especially the separation from his son Kiefer for many years. He was also a man of poor health, once nearly dying of spinal meningitis right on the set of another film. Old age brought him type 2 diabetes and serious cardiovascular issues, forcing him to undergo heart valve replacement surgery and face difficulty walking due to osteoarthritis. However, Donald never let illness stop his passion for art. He continued to contribute persistently until his final days, leaving his mark even in modern blockbusters like The Hunger Games. His career was brilliant, but his end came gently as an inevitable rule. On June 20, 2024, Donald Sutherland took his last breath in New York at the age of 88. He departed, leaving a fortune of $60 million and a large void in the hearts of film lovers regarding a multi-talented and intellectual artist. George Kennedy as Major Max Armbruster. Next to a rebellious Reisman was Major Max Armbruster, the loyal, calm, and solid partner. George Kennedy, then 42 years old, performed this role with rustic sincerity, becoming the spiritual support for the whole team. In real life, George Kennedy was also such a man, enduring, devoted, and always the gentle giant of Hollywood. He dedicated himself to the arts for 60 years, from gritty supporting roles to holding the prestigious Oscar statuette. However, behind that illustrious career were hidden pains that George rarely shared. As a DIY veteran, he carried PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, causing him frequent insomnia and irritability in the early years after discharge. His marital life was also stormy, with 2 breakups before finding lasting happiness with Joan McCarthy. The greatest tragedy of his life was the tragic death of his son, a pain that kept the old father awake for many nights in solitude. The connection between the role and George Kennedy's life is loyalty and endurance. Just as Armbruster always stood by Reisman, George always stood by his family and acting career despite heart disease tormenting him for decades. He underwent heart surgery, lived with chronic chest pain, but never gave up the film set. But then, that kind heart also had to rest. On February 28, 2016, George Kennedy passed away in Idaho at the age of 91. He departed peacefully, leaving the world the image of a hard-working artist and a golden heart that stopped beating after so many years of dedication. To truly appreciate George Kennedy's contribution to the Dirty Dozen, one must recognize that this film was the launching pad that propelled him from a that guy character actor into a bona fide star. Just shortly after this film, he would secure his place in history with Cool Hand Luke, 1967, winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor as Dragline. That role, much like Armbruster, utilized his imposing physical size, he was 6'4", and contrasted it with a deep well of vulnerability and loyalty. Kennedy was unique in Hollywood. He was one of the few actors who could transition seamlessly from playing menacing heavies in westerns and thrillers to being the comedic heart of the Naked Gun series as Captain Ed Hocken. This versatility kept him working when many of his contemporaries faded away. He was a fixture of 1970th disaster movies, most notably as Joe Petroni in the Airport franchise, a character who became a symbol of blue-collar competence and survival. George's real-life military service under General George S. Patton during World War II profoundly shaped his work ethic and his portrayal of military men. He spent 16 years in the Army before acting, a background that gave his performance as Major Armbruster an authenticity that method acting simply couldn't replicate. He knew how a soldier stood, how he listened, and how he carried the burden of command. In his personal life, Kennedy's capacity for love was tested in his later years. After the death of his daughter Taylor due to addiction issues, George and his wife Joan adopted their granddaughter, Taylor, raising her as their own when George was well into his 70s. It was an act of immense love and sacrifice, proving that his gentle giant persona was not an act. His final years were marked by a heartbreaking decline following the death of his beloved wife Joan in 2015. Friends said George simply lost the will to live without her. Lee Marvin as Major John Reisman. The soul of the entire film, Major John Reisman, was an insubordinate, gritty, and strategic officer. Lee Marvin, at age 43, didn't need to act much to exude that aura, because in real life he was a Marine veteran covered in war scars. This role took Lee Marvin to the pinnacle of fame, but it also reflected the inner torment of a soldier who never truly left the battlefield. He lived an intense life, drowning in alcohol to soothe the demons in his mind and the physical pain from losing part of his intestine in World War II. Lee Marvin's life was an endless storm. His first marriage shattered in violence and constant drunkenness. Later, his relationship with Michelle Triola led to the Marvin vs. Marvin lawsuit that shook American legal history, leaving him exhausted both financially and mentally. Although he later found a peaceful harbor with Pamela Marvin, his health was severely eroded by a destructive lifestyle and war after-effects. He had to use morphine to function but still tried to keep a strong image before the public. The similarity between Reisman and Lee Marvin is the loneliness of the commander. On film, Reisman carried the lives of 12 convicts, while in real life, Lee Marvin carried the pain of the past that no one fully understood. He was a warrior who fought until his last breath, not against the enemy, but against himself. That stormy journey ended on August 29, 1987. Lee Marvin passed away after a heart attack in Arizona at the age of 63. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, a place for true soldiers, leaving behind a cinematic legacy as gritty and tragic as his own life. Clint Walker as Samson Posley. In The Dirty Dozen, Samson Posley appeared as a gentle giant, a man of few words but hiding terrifying strength. Clint Walker, standing nearly 2 meters tall with a muscular physique, brought to this character a reliable calmness amidst a chaotic group of convicts. At 40, Clint was already an icon of the Western genre, but the role of Posley showed the audience another side of him: silent courage. However, behind that man of steel exterior was a life continuously tested by pain, both physical and mental. Clint Walker's private life was a series of harsh events. After a bitter first marriage ended after 20 years, he thought he found perfect happiness with his second wife, Giselle Hennessy, whom he called his true love. But fate played a cruel joke. Her death from cancer in 1994 defeated the giant, pushing him into depression for many years. Not stopping there, Clint was also a man who returned from the dead in the literal sense. In a horrific skiing accident in 1971, a ski pole pierced through his chest, puncturing his heart. He was pronounced dead, but a medical miracle pulled him back to life. The resilience of Samson Posley on film seemed to be a projection of the real Clint Walker. He survived a fatal accident, survived the pain of losing his wife to find peace in his final years. Although carrying a heart that had been wounded both literally and figuratively, he lived a quiet and dignified life. However, the journey of that giant finally had to stop. On May 21, 2018, Clint Walker passed away in California due to congestive heart failure at the age of 90. He was buried simply next to his wife Giselle, closing the life of a legend who fought tirelessly against the Grim Reaper. Telly Savalas as Archer J. Maggot. Among the 12 convicts, Archer J. Maggot was the most terrifying and insane. Telly Savalas, at age 45, excellently performed the role of a religious fanatic who was brutal and perverted. Maggot's wild eyes were one of the most haunting highlights of the film. This role paved the way for Telly to reach the legendary Kojak persona later, but it also partly reflected his own turbulent life. Behind the tough exterior and arrogant smile, Telly Savalas had to face a series of family tragedies. His father's death from cancer pushed him into financial difficulties, leading to the collapse of his first marriage. His second marriage also crumbled under the pressure of fame, pushing him into depression and alcohol. Only at the end of his life did he find a brief moment of peace. But fate teased him. Just as happiness was blooming, prostate and bladder cancer struck. The image of Telly Savalas with a bald head, originally a consequence of chemotherapy but which became his trademark, is proof of heartbreaking resilience. He worked as if acting was the only medicine helping him forget physical pain. But then, that battle also had to stop. On January 22, 1994, Telly Savalas passed away in California at the age of 72. He departed exactly one day after his birthday, closing a life full of talent but also full of hardships. John Cassavetes as Victor E.R. Franco. Victor R. Franco was the most rebellious, loudest, and most unruly member of the group. John Cassavetes, 37 years old, with fiery eyes and an arrogant smile, turned Franco into one of the most impressive characters in the film, earning him an Oscar nomination. But few know that John participated in this commercial film with only one purpose: to earn money to feed his own dream of independent cinema. He was a genius, the father of American independent film, who always yearned to portray the naked truth of life on screen. John Cassavetes' life was a jazz piece full of improvisation but also full of tragedy. He and his wife, superstar Gina Rowlands, created their own artistic empire. But the price to pay was health exhaustion. To cope with creative and financial pressure, John turned to alcohol as a soulmate. Drunkenness helped him soar in art but destroyed his body day by day. He lived fast, burned himself out for Lifetime Films, ignoring the doctor's warnings about his dying liver. Franco's stubbornness on film was a copy of John Cassavetes in real life, never compromising. He would rather die than make films according to others' will, and tragedy came as an inevitability. On February 3, 1989, cinematic genius John Cassavetes passed away in Los Angeles due to complications from cirrhosis. At just 59 years old, he departed when his talent was ripe, leaving a vast void for world cinema and a painful lesson about the artist's sacrifice for his passion. John Cassavetes hated the Dirty Dozen. He frequently clashed with director Robert Aldrich and openly mocked the film's commercial nature during production. Yet, ironically, the paycheck from this movie and his later role in Rosemary's Baby financed his masterpiece, Faces 1968. This was the duality of his existence. He sold his talent to Hollywood as an actor so he could buy his freedom as a director. On set, Cassavetes was an electric wire of energy. He improvised many of Franco's most memorable moments, a habit that frustrated the disciplined director but ultimately resulted in the film's most authentic scenes. His chemistry with Lee Marvin was tense but effective. Marvin respected Cassavetes' talent but found his rebellious nature exhausting, a dynamic that mirrored their characters perfectly. Cassavetes' filmmaking philosophy was radical. He mortgaged his house, used his family as crew, and shot films in his own living room to capture raw, unpolished human emotion. His partnership with Gina Rowlands is considered one of the greatest collaborations in cinema history. He pushed her to emotional extremes in films like A Woman Under the Influence, creating art that was uncomfortable, messy, and deeply real. However, this intensity came at a steep personal cost. Cassavetes lived on cigarettes, coffee, and alcohol, sleeping only a few hours a night, driven by a manic need to create before his time ran out. He knew he was dying long before the end. When told he had 6 months to live, he outlived the prognosis by several years through sheer force of will, continuing to write and direct until he physically could not stand. His death at 59 was a devastating blow to the independent film community. He didn't just leave behind movies, he left behind a movement. Every indie filmmaker today who shoots a movie on a shoestring budget with a handheld camera owes a debt to Victor R. Franco, the man who played a soldier so he could fight a bigger war for artistic freedom. Charles Bronson as Joseph T. Vladislaw. Joseph T. Vladislaw was the quiet, taciturn, but most loyal and reliable character in the team. Charles Bronson, with a rugged face and sorrowful eyes at age 46, turned Vladislaw into a true man of steel. He didn't need many lines to show strength. His presence alone was enough. This role solidified Bronson's position as a masculine icon of world cinema. However, behind that man of steel was a heart broken by loss. Charles Bronson's life changed completely when he met and loved Jill Ireland. She was the only person who understood the sensitive soul behind his prickly exterior. But tragedy struck when Jill died of breast cancer in 1990. Her departure completely defeated Bronson. He fell into deep depression, turned to alcohol to drown his sorrows, and was gradually ravaged by Alzheimer's disease, destroying his memory. It is heartbreaking that the man whose face the whole world remembered gradually forgot himself, forgot his loved ones, and even his lifetime roles. In his final years, he lived in confusion and solitude, a tragic end for a legend. On August 30, 2003, Charles Bronson passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 81 due to pneumonia and complications from Alzheimer's. He was buried in Vermont, which he considered his final peaceful home, leaving the world a beautiful but tearful love story and an illustrious career.